Zuhura next, and then Audrey will come to you after. Zuhura, please.
Okay, Julie, thank you very much. And Lynette, I cannot agree with you more about what you have talked about. And when I hear a lot about Africa, that we are not invited around the table on issues that are related to our Africa fate in terms of economic, social engagement with the rest of the world. Yes, it puzzles me because it started so many years with the Berlin Conference and it continued. Now, Lynette, you have brought up something very, very important. You can be invited around the table, but if you have not really expanded your perspective and trying to see the continent in years to come and the decisions that you are making in terms of how will they impact the future of your economy, yes, you can be around that table, but also come back with a raw deal. And that's what we have seen in many cases where, yes, our leaders go around the table, they go, they negotiate, but what they come back with is not what is good for Africa. Now, is it maybe because lack of leadership capability of seeing these things and evaluate? Because there is a certain leadership approach, which maybe it is not helping the continent. Because the generations that have seen Africa where we are, if I remember the generation of the people who fought for independence in Africa, they were very intentional about what they wanted. They were very intentional about how they wanted to engage with the world. But then we went into the period of neocolonialism, which again, how our colonizers decided to use our newly elected African leaders in terms of how they are going to focus, where they are going to focus. For example, a case in point, the French colonies in Africa. We still have countries in Africa that are repatriating some of its resources to the central bank of Paris. Paris, if you look at French as a government, the economy is being supported by Africa. The looting they did during colonialism still continues. Now the question is, why are we are not having our leaders questioning such things? If there is a bad deal which was created when they were leaving the continent, can't we do something about it? And when I spoke the first time, I talked about the new generation. I talked about the exposure that we have already. What can we do to change such things, and which they're still hurting Africa? Then it comes to the international institutions that we are told they are global institutions. And these global institutions like IMF, like other institutions, WTO, and a whole of other institutions. If you look at their making, the architecture of these institutions, they are not designed to make Africa become independent of the shackles of economy that we have. They are not designed to do that. But what are we doing? I was speaking one day with the envoy of Morocco, and you remember the devastation of earthquake in Morocco. And when I was speaking to him, I wanted to know, how did they manage to build capability that when they had such a big disaster, they were able to say, we are okay, we can handle it. It is an intentional steps of the leadership that decided we are going to build capability and we are going to do it in this way. So what I think, and I said it in my first contribution, unless Africa, we are ready to have candid conversation with ourselves, and we are ready to sit and say, how do we want to engage with the rest of the world? As Julie has put it, we are not the most corrupt. Those who came to our continent, they raped us during daylight. They took our people. They put in systems that continued to exploit Africa. They are the most corrupt people. And we should be able to talk with assertiveness and say, yes, we have natural resources. Yes, we have a young population. And this is what we have as our terms. And when we go around the table, we present our terms that have been, discussed within our continent, that have had integrated thinking of our young population. Because whatever we are doing today, no matter how little the debt we are taking today, it is going to be inherited by our children. It is our grandchildren who are going to pay for this debt. We are actually shackling our future generation to serious, crisis of repaying for some of the things that we are investing, which do not make sense at the moment. I'm very worried about the Chinese approach to the continent. It gives me a lot of sleepless nights because whatever infrastructure that the Chinese are building in Africa, it is going to make us unable to repay. And when it is we are unable to repay, they are going to demand a pound of flesh from Africa. And we are not going to be here. We'll be dead. We'll be, just sand. It is our grandchildren who are going to live with the decisions we are making today. So Africa, we really need to make a decision analysis. We need to involve multi-generational discussion about what we want to do and engage with the world from the point of knowledge and honesty. Thank you.
Wow, remarkable. Thank you for that. And so significant. What a concern you raised there, and something that we need to be very alive to. Audrey, I hope you can hear us. Can I come to you now? And Chennai, I believe your hand has been up for a while. So as soon as we hear from Audrey, we'll come to you.
I can hear you now.
Fantastic.
Some hurdles, sure.
So we're looking at, and I think we've had a great conversation. Maybe what I'll come to you with now is, in this highly complex world with significant geopolitical realities, Africa positioned in a place where we're vulnerable to so many things, proxy wars, exploitation. How do we prepare young leaders today? What are some of the most critical things we can do to prepare you all for success as leaders in this era? Sorry, we've lost your sound, Audrey.
Sure.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Great. Okay, awesome. So the question is how best you can prepare us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll say, first of all, it's not cliche when they say you should bring us to the table. And I think a lot of the leaders here today and panelists have spoken on how, we need to bring youth in, thinking of succession plan, etc. We need to be at the table. I mean, I'll give an example of where currently I've been in a program, a negotiation class, right, that now I'll say has been empowering me over 6 months now to be in the corridors of power to negotiate around land issues, climate issues at the UN, right? If the opportunity was not there, right, for me to actually either apply and go for it, and be accepted into that academy to learn all the reals, the levels of engagement, to be able to negotiate and be in the rooms of world leaders, right? I wouldn't be able to understand the ropes. I wouldn't be able to be mentored, be nurtured with my mindset and setting actions and strategies I need to take. So first of all, I think it's really crucial and imperative that we are in the rooms, right? We are a part of the table, right? We're part of the policy making. We're part of the strategies that need to be implemented. I think that's the first thing. And then the second thing I would say has to do with, I think Memo mentioned it, and I think in this geopolitical era, I think it's important to have role models like mentorships. How are we connecting and building community with our elders, people who have run the gamut, who understand the trajectory, the journey, who have learned lessons, right? we want to be those vessels they can pour out those lessons to, right? Involve us, engage us, and we're willing to do that. And I think honestly, it's quite simple. And I think to me, that's the technology. It's not necessarily just a social media, etc. I think now elders are the technology. You guys are what we need to be able to transition and jump those hurdles in order to navigate what's going on in the current climate. So I think that's what I would say for now.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Chennai, can I ask you to unmute? I hope you can, and let us know your thoughts, please.
She's actually just sent a comment in the chat.
Oh,
that
please
says,
go ahead,
please,
Twasima. Would you read it for us? Thank you.
She says, please disregard my hand raise. I was applauding one of the panelists asking a question. But
Thank you so much.
yeah, now that we're here, there are a couple of other questions from the audience that I think we can just dive into.
Wonderful.
Okay, so there's a question from Boniface, and Boniface says, what do young people need to feel psychologically safe enough to speak openly and honestly about how they feel? I think we're going to pose that to you, Zuhura, because you did mention that point. Yes, perhaps Zuhura, you can respond, and then we can go to the next question that's posed to Memo.
Okay, yeah. First, maybe what I need to do is to define what is psychological safety, because it is a discussion which is taking place even in the economic forum. It is been, it's been who you are, and knowing that speaking up will not cause you pain, either emotional or physical pain, and then you'll be respected for what you have said, meaning that it has two accesses, the vertical axis being the level of respect and the horizontal axis, the acceptance. So the first basic level is the acceptance. And I think one of you said we should be invited around the table. That gesture itself, it is acceptance, that we recognize you are there. We have accepted you. And when you are invited around that table, to be afforded respect to contribute your ideas without feeling like I'm going to be reprimanded. So that is how it is. Now, if you look at the education system that we inherited from our colonial masters, still we have not included this in our classrooms. If you look at how our children are taught, and even if you look at how we are bringing up our children, we have not allowed them to be who they are. And when I talk about who they are and what they can be, I'm not saying that we just leave them to be like wild animals. No. We as a generation, which is the parents, we should be the guiding force. We should be the ones who are assisting them to understand the world from the perspective of our experience. But with that kind of an injection enrichment, allow them to express themselves openly. And when they express themselves, give them opportunity to accept challenge and to be interrogated the way they're interrogating us, but from the space of respect. Now, that is not happening. So our young people will not feel safe to contribute. And when our young people are not feeling safe to contribute, we have missed an opportunity of innovation. And Africa, we are missing that opportunity big time. Within our families, within our workspaces, within our governments, and within our communities, because that opportunity side of innovation cannot have any competition from anything else. Because technology, yes, it is there, but it cannot innovate. Yeah? Finances cannot innovate. Capital goods cannot innovate. It's only a human being that can innovate. Imagine when we shut out our most agile and well-exposed young people from giving them the respect that they need, from allowing them to be mavericks. Instead, we sacrifice them on the altar of conformity, and that is killing Africa. Thank you.
Wow, wow. Twasima, before you go on with the next question, because that is such a profound issue that has come up, I'd love to hear your view on this. What Zuhura has shared with us, the enlightenment she's just created on what we've been doing and how we need to change. Anything to add there? And any of the young people as well on this panel, and anything to add? I'd love to hear from the young voices on this issue as well. Twasima?
So much wisdom. I think the question of how we feel safe enough to contribute is a pertinent question, right? And I think that it's also a question of leadership, because the role of any good leader is preparing the next generation for transition, is preparing the next generation to be able to transform in the ways that they need to transform, to take up the spaces that they need to transform. That has been largely lacking from our generation. And I do feel that it's really a call for leadership. It's a wake-up call, because I mean, change is going to happen whether or not we decide, whether or not we like. Things must change. And I think when you look at the protests, if you look at the protests and the kind of violences that are a result of the protest in isolation, then you can say, well, young people are to be blamed because, you know, they're not acting right, and etc., which has been some of the rhetoric, right, that we have seen. And this is why, you know, young people are being jailed and etc., because you're looking at it in isolation, right? You're not contextualizing and understanding that, I mean, they have been crying about these things for so long. I think now of a quote that says, we are sick of symbolic things, we are fighting for our lives. And that's really what it is. So I just echo everything that Zuhura has said. I think this is a call for leadership. This is a demand, really, an insistence that young people will be heard and will be seen and will be felt. And I do feel strongly that the ways in which we go into this next phase of transition all across the continent is dependent largely on what the establishments decide to do and how they decide to react. And good or bad, I guess, we're gonna have to tangle with those consequences together. Memo has her hand up, so I'm gonna pose, I think, the same question to Memo.
All right. I don't know the question from the audience, but just to respond to Zuhura, again, she's full of wisdom. I had so much to write as she was speaking, but I kept remembering there's a quip that goes, what we learn from history is that we never learned history. And when she mentioned about the investments of the Chinese in collaboration with many African countries, and what has been happening more so here in Kenya with the protest. I don't think you need to be an economist, of course, to know that when you increase tax, especially tax on staple foods, on bread, cooking oil, etc., that you're making life difficult. And life has been very difficult for many youths, especially. I just, again, graduated from uni. So now is when I'm on the ground fully, apparently as an adult, apparently. But, and it is difficult. And I can't imagine how it is possibly for people who are in worse conditions. And as Audrey said, one of the things that young people need to be a part of is with the policies that are being created, even the tax policies, understanding the ins and outs of how corporations like World Bank and IMF work with African countries, and being part of the conversation on the table, not just on social media, is one of the major steps that we need to take as African leaders, especially to include youths to be aware of what each and every single policy entails to the economy, to the environment, and even to them themselves. So I don't know what question was posed, but then one of the things that crossed my mind is post the protest, one of the initiatives that the government did, which to a great extent, the government did listen to the youth, of course, and the finance bill was rejected. But one of the initiatives that was launched was the Comprehensive Migration and Mobility Framework between Kenya and Germany. And I know it's a very contentious topic here in Kenya, but I think it's a great opportunity for young people to be exposed also to developed countries. Here is where the natural resources are. Africa is going to be Africa is already the next powerhouse, but then I do believe developed countries are where they are in terms of technology and even work ethics for different reasons. And we need to have that collaboration with developed countries by sending out our young people. And ultimately, their goal should be, my mission is here in Kenya. And with my studies at African Leadership University, of course, one of the things that you have to develop in your first year is your mission statement here in Africa with a global challenge or a global opportunity. And I do desire to go do my master's abroad, God willing. But I know with the exposure that I'm getting out there, it's for my people back home. And the only way we can do that, just this is a little bit repetitive, but it's a more of an emphasis, is by now having those mentors and role models in place for us to come home and invest in our agriculture, invest with technology. A lot of the people don't know this, but a lot of the technologies and even social media like Snapchat was innovated or created by Africans. I forgot the name of the brilliant mind. He's Ghanaian, but he is at the back end of a lot of these social media developments. And I think that says a lot about our potential as Africans. And Madam Zuhura pointing out that we need to keep in mind our history and not to repeat it. It should be an emphasis that we have in our education. Just something that I needed to point out. I think you can now ask the question. Yeah.
I want to ask a question, but I think Audrey has her hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to make a quick one here, and echoing the sentiments and message of everyone, Memo and Madam Zuhura. But there was a mantra that I kind of live by, and I felt I could share as my response to the question on psychological safety. And
Audrey, before you share the mantra, could you just lean back a little bit so we can get your whole face as you share it? Thank you.
All right, awesome. I hope it's clear now. My bad.
Yes, thank you.
Welcome. All right, so and the mantra is feel the fear and do it anyways. Right? I think we need to hold on to that power because already we've got the exuberance as youth. We do have tenacity and resilience, but I think for us to be able to reach, right, and take hold of things that would help transform our lives, our families, communities, we need to start being comfortable with feeling the fear and doing it anyways, right? And I think sometimes that opens doors, that opens opportunity and insight into things that we never even knew about ourselves, about other issues around us. So I'd say, yes, I do agree. It's important that we're accepted as a Terra, but I think we also need to start knowing that we can do this and feel it, but do it.
Feel it and do it. I like that. Okay, we're going to move on to the next question from Memo. We had wanted to just do a final round of questions to the audience where we just speak a little bit on the tools that we have at our disposal, and finally just any tangible pathways into putting Africa into leadership. So just to contextualize, we have about 20 minutes, so what we still need to get to. Okay, so there's a question from Patrick Kabuya, and he says, Habari Memo, I support your message that we need to design and implement government policies that cater for future generations. How should the youth, especially those in the rural areas, be proactively, practically, and innovatively involved in developing such policies today? I do think this is an important question just because of just how many young people still live in the rural parts of our continent. Over to you.
That's a brilliant question. The interesting thing is, one of the projects that we're doing in the Wild Now Foundation is we are researching about our forest called Lariak. And Lariak Forest, it's birthing ground for elephants. So, and it's also a migration corridor. So it's connected to different other forests around the country. But the migration corridor has been encroached by development and human encroachment and agriculture. And so when we started the research, it was for community capacity building and also education about coexistence. But there has been, we're still working on it, there has been a lot of reluctance from the community to collaborate with us and also the government on these issues. However, we've had policies based on Lariak Forest and also the Environment Act here in Kenya that guides us on protecting the wildlife corridors in Lariak Forest and around the country. But the reason the community is reluctant is because they were not involved in formulating this policy. And so one of the issues that we have in policy formulation is that we have brilliant policies. I've gone through a lot of the conservation policies around Africa, and we are up for a good start in terms of conservation and tackling climate change. But it's not invested on the people in the ground, on the grassroots communities. And so the ball is more on our courts, on people who can make this change and go on the ground and involve these people. So the first step that we did as Wild Now Foundation, we work closely with the Ministry of Wildlife and Environment. And now is when we are reformulating policies or in wildlife corridors and engaging the communities. So it's more of having educational outreach and initiatives, awareness about the laws and policies that govern these people, and just taking advantage of social media. TikTok has become very broad even to the rural communities. And I think it is important for us to have things that even relate with them, to create content that relates to them with their cultures and the people that they relate with to those communities. Urban rural migration is something else that I would emphasize. We have projects where we sometimes bring in, we take our youth from Nairobi to Laikipia. I've been doing this since I was way back in high school. But right now is when I can see the fruits of all those projects, because now there's a collaboration between the youth who are in the city and the youth who are in rural areas. And you can see the connections and the conversations that they're having is to amplify each other from the different spaces that we are in. So there's an emphasis that if you are in a position as a leader, whether you are in the education system, whether you're in the environment system like myself, or in your arts, like storytelling with King David, then the influence that you have on the youth currently, you can create the same connections now with the people in the grassroots level, which I think is important. And I think that is the true game changer that we need in Africa, because majority of the youth are actually in the rural communities. Yeah. Hope I've answered your question.
Yeah. Okay. So I just want to pick up from that and just talk a little bit about the tools that we have at our disposal. And I'm going to pose this question to both Lynette and Zuhura. All over the continent, there have been several examples of collective movements and actions. And these have particularly been mobilized on the internet. We have the 2024 campaigns, of course, such as Kenya's Finance Bill, Uganda's End Corruption, Nigeria's End Bad Governance. But these are just the continuation of some of the previous campaigns that we've seen. You know, we had Fees Must Fall in South Africa in 2019. We had End SARS in Nigeria in 2020. We had the Women's March in Uganda in 2018. So it's very clear that young people are mobilizing on the internet and mobilizing quite effectively. So, two questions for the both of you. One, what are the implications of this digital mobilization for governance and public accountability? And what should current and future leaders be paying attention to that perhaps they're not quite focused on just yet?